So now that we figured out if we're going to do a live production, a live to tape, or a recorded production, we're going to have to go in and kind of figure out how do we want to record this. And because over the years, various technologies have come out to change the way we record and play back video. And so we have to decide if we want to use things like tape, film, DVDs, video discs, Blu-rays, disk drives like file servers, if we want to use solid state media, or if you want to use like a virtual storage or something that's located away from our location. So the first one I want to look at is motion picture and kind of how video began. So the first series of videos that were recorded, well, before the videos, we had still images. Someone would just have a camera and they would snap a still photo. And then there was Edward Morbury, or Murray Bridge, sorry, came up with an idea that he wanted to show an animation. So he had set up 24 cameras side by side, and he had attached tripwires to each of the cameras, and he had a horse run across in front of the cameras, and as the horse would move, it would trip each of those wires, which would cause the camera to go off, and that gave him 24 frames of a horse in each phase of it moving. And then he went back and he took those pages and he sort of like flipped them together so they go like faster and faster, and he got the first animation, or the first recorded moving picture. And so from there, it just kind of went on. The technology behind them was kind of simple. He would do maybe like a flip book, or there's another type called stop animation where you would set something, freeze, take a picture of it, and then you would move your hand or the object a little more, take another picture, and then you move a little bit more. And that would give you some basic animation that you can kind of pull off. And they were done with various types of media. It could be done on paper by flipping through a book. It could have been done with a model. Some of them were even done with clay, which was one of the first types of animations we had, called claymation. And sometimes that's still being used today. So you can still see stop animation being moved. And then likewise, it's even been evolved into computer animation. So they will tell a computer that if a person is here at one moment and then their hand is like moved over a second later, the computer can go back and it can create those frames between those 2 points. And so while they once they had an animation, they started playing around with how fast a frame should last, and they basically based it on a frame per second, or FPS. And so they tried things like 12 frames a second. And they noticed that it was kind of giving your animation sort of a jerky look. They tried it up at like 60 frames per second, or 120, and they found that it was giving you an unrealistic look at how the animation was going. It was also having a lot of frames repeated, because the animation was so minute in its change from frame to frame that people didn't really notice. So one of the basic formats they settled on was about 24 frames a second. And one of the things they noticed was if you take your hand and just kind of wave it, it gets a little bit blurry. Let me do it in front of the background. And that's a normal look. With like 60 frames or 120 frames, there was crystal clear clarity the entire time. It didn't look like a natural blending that your eyes and your brain would see. So they kind of figured out for film that was going to be about 24 frames a second. And then European versions, they had about 25 frames per second. And in the US, they came up with their concept of 30 frames per second. And so they realized that these were going to be a pretty good animation that was going to give you something kind of smooth, versus something that was either going to be like really choppy or way too refined that it wasn't realistic. And then they got stored or saved. And so the first type of media that saved images was film. And a film was a strip of negatives, much like a single camera. And the camera in the film camera could basically record an image really quick as the film was progressing, and then the next one would load and it would shoot. And so they were able to shoot 24 frames in 1 second, and then they could reliably play it back 24 frames per second to give you good quality record and playback. And so TV stations would assign their reporters or their videographers, which would be guys with realm film cameras on their shoulders, to go out and shoot video. And then they would bring that back to the station, where they would have to develop the negative and turn it into from a format that was captured to something that could do playback. And this was done through a series of chemicals and chemical baths in time for the film to develop. You couldn't just go straight from shooting to editing. The film had to be processed first. And then they would have a room that would have a series of machines designed to edit it. And so shooting something on film was a lot of effort and a lot of time, and it wasn't something that they did very often. And it did lead to a term that stations would say of they'd have a commercial, and they'll say during the commercial, this news happened today, we have film at 11, or we have film on this, which means it's not just a person talking about it, we've got video to show. And film for news didn't really become considered a massive necessity or a very popular format until the assassination of U.S. President John F. Kennedy. At this time, this was not really there was no live broadcast of this event, so they didn't have anything recorded. But they did have camera people shooting this story, because in this case for news, it was pretty popular. It was something important that they would want video of the president having a motorcade coming through town. They didn't know about the assassination at the time. So once the event happened, the assassination occurred, they had video that they could redistribute to the entire world. And this was one of the first times they've ever taken an incident and made copies of the film and then spread it out. So once the event happened in Texas, within hours they were rushing copies of this video up to New York, out to Washington DC, over to Los Angeles, all over the United States, and then all over the world. So they were starting to make copies of this film. And now more and more stations were taking this video that someone else had shot, and they were incorporating it into their newscast. So by having film and television news back in the 1920s, and so it became evident that this was going to be an important part of journalism, news recording, and video distribution. And one of the things about about film, is it gave us a term that we use nowadays with our video switcher. And this is the term for a transition called a cut. And a cut is where they would go in and they would take a pair of scissors, and they would cut right between two pieces, and then they could take a piece out, put them together, and then take some tape and wrap it around. So whenever we talk about the director's switcher, where we go from one input to the other, we do a transition called a cut, which is an instantaneous transition. It gives we get this term from editing film. We also get the term that film is known as footage. We have footage of this event, and that goes back to when film was measured in feet. So if you were going to buy a reel of film, you would buy not so much like minutes or seconds, you would buy footage. So we'd buy 100 feet worth of film or 250 feet worth of film, and that would go out with a reporter. So the film was measured in footage, and then over the years, the term footage came to represent if we have video of it. So we can say roll footage, and that means we're playing back the video that was recorded. And then back in around the early 50s, 1953, a new form of video recording was introduced, and this was known as the videotape. The concept was similar to the reel-to-reel magnetic strips that they had for audio and what would later become audio cassettes, where you had a magnetic tape that could receive an impulse recorded, and then another device could read those recorded magnetic impulses and play them back. And so this gave us the ability to do a new way of shooting and editing video. And with this, we didn't have to spend time developing it, because we could immediately turn around and take something that we recorded and played it back. Now, one of the downsides to video was the quality was not as good as film. It was the magnetic properties just can't record as well as a negative. So film was still looking better. And this is why during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and 80s, and much on into the 2000s, film was the preferred format for cinema. And it was also the preferred format for shooting types of television shows that would air at night. Now, if you're shooting something like news, since we need fast turnaround, we would shoot on videotape, even though it didn't look as good. And likewise, there's a series of morning shows called soap operas. And soap operas were shooting new episodes every day. And because of this, they need a quick turnaround, so they would shoot on tape. And this is one of the reasons why the quality of soap opera looks different than the quality of film that you would see for nighttime television. Now, these also, this type of media was easier to edit. So what we had was a machine that you could quickly use these two knobs, and you could scroll through and find the point you need. You would set your edit point on your recorder and your player, and then you would hit a button, and it would take that and run with it. And so with videotape, it gave us the ability to edit film a lot faster and to give us what we'd really like. And so it was also reusable. So because this was magnetic, we could take a magnet and run it over the tape, completely erase its content, and then we could start new. So whenever we were dealing with television and journalism, they would have these large tapes, which will only have about 5-10 minutes of videotape on them, and we could record them and use them over and over and over again. Now, in the United States media, we were shooting at 30 frames per second. In Europe, they were shooting at 25 frames per second, so the videos would not reliably line up if we're trying to edit something. So there had to be conversions if we were trying to send video from the United States to Europe and vice versa. It would have to be converted to the US format or the PAL format. And another major problem of these tapes is because the way whenever you would load a tape into a machine, part of the spool would leave the tape, go around the machine, and go back into the spool. And then when you were done, the player would take all that spool and just kind of pull it back into the tape. And there could be tape jam. So sometimes the magnetic tape will get stuck or eaten inside of the video player or recorder. And if that happened, you would have to very carefully try to get your tape out, or you would wind up losing everything that you had shot. And chances are, if a machine had eaten your tape, whatever part of it was in the machine was no longer usable because the media was now folded, had wrinkled, and there was just basically it was corrupted. So when we're building an image in videotape, we're building it in one of two frame rates. The first type of method, or these are one or two types of storage methods for storing video. The first type is what's known as progressive. And with progressive, it's going in and it's building your image one line at a time. And then once it gets to the bottom, it's going to go back and it's going to build the same line a second time. And so it's going to build that image twice, and then it's going to erase it and it's going to start again. And so something like this is progressive. Again, it would build the entire image first, and then it would build the entire image a second time. Now, the other type of frame storage is what's known as interlaced. And with interlaced is it would go with all the odd lines first, and then it would go back in the second pass. It would give you the even lines, and then it would erase, and it would start again, all the odds and then all the evens. And so this is a type of display called interlaced. And so if you ever look at buying a piece of video equipment or television, you may see signs like this is a 720p or 1080p, or this is a 1080i or a 4Ki or 4Kp. That's what those mean. The P means progressive. It's going to build the image first, and then it's going to build it again a second time. Whereas interlaced, it's going to build all of the even lines first, or all the odd lines first, and then it's going to build all the even lines second. So let's take a look at it building a progressive scan. So we took a camera and we basically pointed it at TV and slowed it down. And so you can see on the left side, the image is being built a line at a time. And then on the right side, when we slowed it down even more, you could see that it's going through and it's drawing the entire line, and it's doing it in its complete order. So it's drawing the 5th line, the 6th line, the 7th line, the 8th line, the 9th line. And this is happening so fast that your brain isn't quite able to recognize or register that the lines are being built. It's just seeing that the video is coming in. And you can kind of see that the top of the image is starting to fade out a little bit while the bottom of the image is being drawn. And then it's going to go back and it's going to do it a second time. So that's going to be a progressive scan and interlace scan. And that's one of the two ways that we record video if we're going to be doing it through film or if we're going to be doing it through videotape.